Good evening. Good evening and welcome to Café Artichoke. I'm Ken Iverson and I am pleased to welcome you on behalf of the Portland Storytellers Guild. Tonight, we are celebrating Tellabration, which is a worldwide celebration of the art of storytelling. Isn't that incredible that there is a worldwide celebration? Well, a little housekeeping. Phones, checking my own. Please make sure your phones are on silent. Restrooms. There are 3 restrooms in the building. We have one right over here, which we ask you not to use during the show, unless you want to be part of the show, but we would prefer not. So during intermission, this one's available. There are 2 others. If you go to the rear of this room, turn left, you'll be heading towards Artichoke, the store, and turn your first left. One restroom is upstairs, the other is at the rear of the instrument room. I want to point out that we have a bar, and we have Belinda working the bar. Can we give her a hand? There's soft drinks, beer, wine, snacks, so please use the bar, tip generously, and use the bar often. You might as well. I also want to thank the volunteers from Artichoke tonight. On the door when you're coming in, you saw Steve. Could we give him a hand, please? And right back here, a little bit in the dark, is Gary. He's doing sound tonight. And you undoubtedly met Mike Devaney when you came in. He's part of the Portland Storytellers Guild, and he was our greeter, and he was handing out those cards, which you will want to complete. We'll pick them up during intermission, and at the end of intermission, we'll do a drawing, and whosever name we draw wins 2 free tickets to our next live show here at Artichoke. Tonight, you're going to be hearing from 6 storytellers. You're going to be hearing from myself, Ken Iverson. You can hear from Steve Henegar, Anne Penfound, Gretchen Peterson, Eric Foxman, and Barb Fankhauser. And we will take an intermission after the first 3 tellers. So I've been working on this introduction to Tellabration, and I've got it down to just under 45 minutes. In 1988, J.G. Pinkerton, who was known to his friends as Papa, he came up with an idea that he wanted to have each year a certain night when people all over the country gathered and told stories to their friends and acquaintances. Well, he had the idea, but as he says, I only had the idea. It was the storytelling community that brought the event to life. And now that circle of friends has grown to the point where it happens all across America and in other lands as well. J.G. said, may what the tellers share bring joy to many people, and may the listeners come to know that through storytelling, we can draw closer together in peace and in friendship and in love. Storytelling reaches around the world and across all generations, reminding us of our common humanity. I know storytelling creates experiences, and shared experiences are the basis of all relationships. My best wishes go to all who join in this common endeavor. Our lives are filled with stories. Tellabration is bringing this live storytelling to sites all across the world this night. And the Portland Storytellers Guild is joining with the National Storytelling Network in this celebration of Tellabration. And it begins with the reading of a proclamation. Tellabration. In the name of storytelling, Saturday, November 18th, is hereby proclaimed to be Tellabration, the worldwide event of storytelling. At this very moment, across 6 continents, in 40 states and 9 countries, from Sacramento to Savannah, Boise to Barcelona, West Virginia to the West Indies, Portland, Maine to Portland, Oregon, over 300 audiences are gathered for this spectacular storytelling event. Without further delay, in joy and anticipation, let the stories begin. Thank you. I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's first teller. I have watched this man's storytelling career develop over the years. And what I've been amazed by is how each time I reach out to him, if I'm stuck working on a story, and I say, could we get a coffee? Could we just sit down and talk over this story? He always finds time for me, always. And I'm so appreciative. So I want to introduce my storytelling buddy, Ken Iverson. How do you not ham it up when you introduce yourself? Well, I do love stories. I love all types of stories. But one of the things I love about stories is how there are surprises. And it takes so little to make a story. I mean, you could take a witch, preferably one with poor social skills, drop her into one of our wonderful Pacific Northwest forests, give her a cottage to live in, but cover it in a decidedly substandard building material known as gingerbread. Drop in a couple of children within sniffing distance of that cottage of the gingerbread, and in no time at all, you're going to have a story. And what will happen, who knows? I want to tell you an old story, one I know you've heard, Cinderella. But what I'd like to do is tell you a different version of Cinderella, and one that hopefully will have some surprises for you, including a couple of words that are twisted about. Once upon a time, there was a beautiful girl named Rindercella. Now, as the story goes, Rindercella was not Harry Vappy. Not Harry Vappy at all. As a matter of fact, Rindercella was very bad. Very bad. And the reason for this was Freethold. You see, she lived with her muggly other and 2 sticked websisters. They made Rindercella work Harry Vard. Harry Vard, from upsun to downsun. She had to cook, she had to bake, she had to screen the flinty doors and to wean the dirty clindos. And then, nar into the fight, she had to sarn their holy docks. Life was ought'n easy for Rindercella, but a lay of right on the horizon. You see, in a far corner of their land, there lived a Pransome Hints. And our Pransome Hints was also Sari Vad. Sari Vad. You see, our Pransome Hints was still looking for that one Gesell Spurl to whom he could have his girt, with whom he could lend his spife. The simple mack of the fatter was that our Pransome Hints was longing to loll in fove. But Fosar, low nuck. We join our Pransome Hints as he lustrously cases the comely lordors of the Poyoralis. And suddenly he has an idea. I have it, he exclaims joyfully. I'll have a boil roll right here at the Poyoralis. And I will invite all of the beautiful burros from the corners of my dinkum. That's just what he did. And though Rindercella was not able to go, she's not invited, she was morced into faking 3 Drew Nesses, complete with batten sloves, sluffy peas, lily fracing hounding the wrens. We join Rindercella on that fateful night, as she is searing Padley through the weaned Clindo, watching the other 3 as they head off round the Dode, going to the Boyle Rawl, where they will meet the Pransome Hints. Overcome with grief, Rindersella flipped to the floor, tearing great shears. And suddenly there was a lash of flight, a lightning flash of light. And who should appear? None other than Gary Fodmother. Gary Fodmother looks at Rindersella, says, Rindersella, what you crying for? Gary Fodmother, it's not fair. I can't go to the boil roll because I don't have a darty press. Don't cry, Gilly Searle. I'll make you a darty press. She gets out her Wagic Man. Rindersella is dressed in the most beautiful darty press you ever saw. Complete with 2 tiny slash skippers, one for each finey toot. Gary Fodmother looks around. She sees Rindersella's 3 met pice. She turns each one of them into a splendidly dressed sploachman to accompany Rindersella on her way to the boil roll. She goes over and peers through the wing window and sees in the yard a large Pat Fumpkin. And she turns it into a splendid sploach to carry Rindersella to the boil roll. But then she looks about. She's used up all the met pice. There's nothing left to create a hind force to pull the splendid sploach. Then she remembers, I'm at Gary Fodmother. I'm in charge of everything, even the tuckadology. And she walks back over to the window. She turned that splendid sploach into a hybrid. Rindersella is going green. This is a Pacific Northwest fairy tale. And soon Rindersella finds herself driving her splendid hybrid sploach to the boil roll, accompanied by the 3 splendidly dressed sploachmen, with Gary Fodmother's final warning ringing in her ears, be back by the stroke of midnight, because that's when this well spears off. At the boil roll, everything went true to form in Boris Stook fashion. Our pransome hint spied our faded mare as she entered. It was Fuv at first sight. He raced across the flance door, took her into his arms, and they spent the entire evening dancing and gazing wistfully into each other's eyes. And soon, Rindersella also had lollen in Fuv and lost all track of time. She was horrified when she heard the walk on the claw strike, Nidbite! Nidbite! She pulled herself from the eager arms of the pransome hints. She turned and she raced across the flance door, through the doors, and down the stairs. But just as she reached the bottom, she slopped her dipper. The pransome hints was coming host Beclinehurst down the stairs. And he found the tiny slash skipper. I will see searchiously until I find the faded mare that has slopped her dipper at the boil roll. And off he went. And as handsome princes often do, he went to every house in the kingdom before the right one. Eventually, though, he arrived at the home of Rindersella's mugly other and 2 sticked websisters. He went in, he pulled out the tiny slash skipper. But when he tried it on each one of them, it would knit father fig beat. But then he saw Rindersella outside tending the animals. He had her brought in, and she sat before him. And he tried that tiny slash skipper. It clipped slightly right onto her finey toot. And she smiled at him, and she reached into her pocket and took out the matching tiny slash skipper, which he then took, and it glimpsed slightly onto her other finey toot. He knew, from this, he knew without a dado of a shout, this was the faded mare that had slopped her dipper at the boil roll. They were in love. Oh, and soon they were married. Oh, and they lived happily all the lays of their dives. Or, as we sometimes say in a fairy tale, they lived happily, as I hope each and every one of you also does, all the days of their lives, happily ever after. Thank you. Thank you very much. One of my favorite stories. Now, our next storyteller, my good friend Steve Henegar, he tells me that he has moved often in his life, sometimes for school, sometimes for work, but through making all these moves, he has come to know neighborhoods, whether it be urban or suburban or rural. And sometimes these neighborhoods leave him feeling, well, tell you what, here's Stephen to tell you about that neighborhood.
Evening, everyone. So, a few years back, my then wife and I lived in a Southern California housing tract called Morning Sunwood. And Morning Sunwood was surrounded by 4-lane arterials. Morning Sunwood was bounded by 7-foot decorative block walls and the mid-70s ranch houses that were packed in along the narrow streets and cul-de-sacs. Was the closest we had ever gotten to middle class. And so Morning Sunwood was very, very much a part of the everyday world. But one time, we found this really wonderful, funny 1960s dresser on Craigslist because we just loved mid-century modern. But when we got it home, we had to figure out what to do with that squat black particle board dresser that had been living in our bedroom for, I don't know, a decade or so. But believing in recycling, we carried it out to the curb, set it there, slapped a free sign on it, which the neighborhood association frowned on, but frankly, everything always disappeared. Now, later that evening, around 11:30 or so, I let the dogs out back for one last turn, decided to step out with them, and found my backyard just socked in with fog. I mean, by the time I had walked halfway across the patio, the porch light was just this smear, and the city lights were staining the fog a kind of burnt orange halfway up the sky, while my dogs flickered in and out of the shadows like starships flickering in and out of warp, which gives you some idea about what I was reading right then. But I happened to glance down, and I noticed that the hair on my arms was covered in these perfect spheres of moisture that had precipitated out of the fog. I reached up, touched my hair, my hand came away wet. I brushed my beard, water actually ran down the front of my shirt, and I realized that I was covered in those perfect spherical jewels, and they were reflecting the light from a nearby bedroom window. And looking at all that treasure, I thought to myself, holy crap, that particle board dresser is out in all of this. By morning, it'll be warped. No one will want it. I'll have to figure out how to bust it up and feed it into the garbage can over the next 3 or 4 weeks. Right? So I cut back through the house, grabbed a couple of dog towels and a roll of plastic we'd been using to do some painting, stepped out onto my front porch, and just stopped dead. There was no time at which my mid-70s suburban housing tract was more beautiful than when it was totally socked in with fog. I mean, you could just barely see the blocky houses against that burnt orange stain, and the street light in front of our house was just this fuzzy cone of light like a force field in a cheap sci-fi movie, right? No, as a matter of fact, halfway down the block was another fuzzy cone of light, and beyond that, a third, as if the neighborhood association had finally decided to establish those teleportation stations for our convenience. And I began to feel like a character in somebody else's cheap sci-fi movie. So I started off the porch, but right then, one of my neighbors turned in at their driveway just a couple of doors down. So I stepped back into the shadows because I really didn't want to have to explain what I was doing by the curb at midnight, drying a dresser. So I stood in the shadows, and they sat in their SUV, and I continued to stand in the shadows, and I could almost hear the dresser warping. But finally, they got out of their car, and the snick of that car door opening leaped into the air all around my head. There was something about the moisture in the air that made every sound sharp and distinct. And as they walked toward the back of their car, the rear hatch began to open on its own. It went just like the Star Trek shuttle. Right? And when they'd gathered their late-night groceries into their arm, they headed for their porch, and the hatch went while the shadows from the porch light flickered along the back of those car windows like insubstantial aliens from, I don't know, vintage Planet X-75. Right? But when the coast was clear, I headed for the curb, dropped the plastic there on the sidewalk, took a towel, and I began to soak up all the moisture that was lying across the top of the dresser. There was something about the tension, the surface tension in the water, that held water all along the top, which is not good for particle board, no matter what galaxy you happen to be living in right then. And about the time that I finished getting that towel totally sopping, I began to hear shh, 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 shh. It was the sound of tennis shoes on damp pavement. And looking up, someone ran into that second cone of light halfway down the block, and they were running down the middle of the street as hard as they could go backwards. And as they entered that fuzzy cone of light, the sound of his tennis shoes leaped into the air around my head again. And as he disappeared into the shadows, they began to fade. And in less than a minute, there he was at my teleportation station. It was this young Asian guy in shorts and a yellow windbreaker running down the middle of my cul-de-sac backwards as hard as he could go. And when he got to the end of our circle, he stopped, leaned forward, trying to catch his breath. And he was maybe 10 feet away. He did not look at me. After all, he'd been running backwards down my cul-de-sac at midnight. I was 10 feet away. I did not say anything because I had been drying a dresser at midnight. And after a couple of really awkward moments, he finally caught his breath, dropped into a crouch, set his feet against the curb like it was a starter's block, and then he leaped forward, this time through my faux teleportation station and out into the darkness. And there he was at that next teleportation station, and as he left that fuzzy cone of light, I swear to God, he flickered. And he never stopped running, but he never reached that last cone of light. He had disappeared as surely as I knew that dresser would disappear by morning. And I stood for a moment with that sopping towel in my hand before I dropped it, grabbed the next towel, finished drying off the dresser, flipped the plastic over it, and tucked it underneath the legs so it wouldn't blow off during the night, gathered everything back up, and headed for my porch where I slipped through the airlock and into the mothership. Now, as usual, the dogs were whining at the back door to be let in, and when I opened for them, they flickered out of the shadows like starships flickering out of warp, and their fur was completely covered in those perfect spheres of moisture that had precipitated out of the fog. They were glistening in that bright yellow kitchen light, and then, being dogs, they shook And each of those perfect jewels rocketed in all directions, including at me, but the air in that kitchen was so dry that they evaporated into warp before they could reach me, and I flinched anyway and was suddenly home again. And the sound of their flapping ears was very, very much a part of the everyday world. That's right. Thank you. I want to introduce you now to our next performer. Please help me welcome Anne Penfound.
Sneak right there. And right there.
Thank you. Hello. My name's Annie. I live in the farm just down the road there. My grandfather's, he's the boss man. And this day he came to me and he said, Annie, I need you to go up to the long meadow. The fence is broken, the cows are out, and I want you to fix it for me. So I collected all the stuff that I needed. I got on my horse and I went up to the long meadow. Oh, the fence was in a right state. And by the time I'd fixed it and I'd got the cows back in, it was coming on dark. But that didn't really matter because I knew the way home. The horse knew the way home. So I mounted up and off we went. And I wasn't paying attention because I was thinking about all the things that I had to do for the rest of the week. When my horse, he stumbled in a pothole and I nearly fell off. And when I looked, I thought, what's that? Where did that pothole come from? It wasn't there this morning. I could swear it wasn't there this morning. And then it started to rain. And it was windy and cold, and I hadn't got a coat. I mean, the afternoon had been glorious. I hadn't even bothered to bring one with me. I was going to get soaked to the skin before I got home, and I thought, need to find somewhere to shelter. So I looked about for a tree or a bush, but that's when I saw a cottage. Now, that cottage had not been there in the morning. It was in a place that it didn't ought to be, but it was a cottage, and you don't look a gift horse in the mouth. So I made my way towards it, and I tied my horse up on the fence there and went up the steps and to the front door, and I knocked. But there was no answer. And I thought, oh no, I'm going to have to stay on the porch. I mean, I'll be dry, but it'd be quite cold. And then I thought, Annie, there's the light in the cottage. Knock on the door again and do it loudly now. And so I did. I loudly knocked on the door, and the door whoosh, opened. But not by a person, not by anybody. And I called out, hello, the house, hello, the house. But no one answered. And that's when I saw the fire. The fire was on the far wall, and it was crackling, and it looked very warm. And there was a settee right in front of it, and I thought, oh, I'll just go and sit on it for a wee bit. If the people come home, I'll explain myself. And, people around here are really friendly. So I went in, and I sat down. Oh, it was nice and warm. And that's when I heard the voice. Annie. Annie. What? Someone was calling me. Maybe the people had come into the kitchen, and so I walked to the end of the room and looked into the kitchen, but no, there was no one there. And I thought, well, maybe they're on the porch, so I went out to the porch, but there was no one on the porch either, and my horse, it was gone. Nothing for it but to come back in and sit in front of the fire. Annie, Annie! Oh my, sounded a little bit cross. Who on earth? And then, out from a cupboard that I hadn't noticed before, they jumped this man. Tall he was, with flaming red hair, and he's shaking a stick at me. But it wasn't that. It was that I knew the man. I knew him for Patrick Rooney. I'd been engaged to Patrick Rooney, and Patrick Rooney was dead. Patrick Rooney was dead. He died in a boating accident 2 or 3 years ago, and I didn't stop. No. I didn't stay. I just turned and I ran as fast as I could out of that house, down the steps and out into the darkness. I didn't care where I went. I ran and ran and ran and ran until I ran right up against a tree. I turned my back around and sat on the ground. And then I noticed how quiet it was, how the wind had stopped and the rain wasn't falling anymore. And that's how I heard the voices. Where shall we put him, the blackguard? Where will we put him? Why don't we put him down under that tree? Tree. I was under a tree. And when I looked, there didn't seem to be any other trees anywhere. And so quick as a flash, I climbed up into that tree and hid myself in the branches and the leaves. I thought it was better to look and see than be seen. And just in time, because 2 scruffy men came walking along with a long box between them, sitting on their shoulders. I mean, it looked like a coffin. And they took it up and they put it down underneath the tree, and then they took off the lid. It was a coffin. Patrick Rooney was lying in it. He was as pale could be, and his arms were crossed and his eyes were closed. And then the men, they just went about collecting wood and built themselves a fire. But not only that, they got some long branches and they put a cross piece like this on either side of the fire and a long pole between them with a handle. Well, it looked like a spit. And didn't they come and get towards the coffin with Patrick Rooney in it, who suddenly opened his eyes and stared up into the tree. It looked and felt as though he was looking into my very soul, and I pulled myself back. The men didn't notice. They just picked up Patrick Rooney, took him over to the spit and tied him on it. And then one said to the other, "Who'll turn him while we're away, stop him from burning?" Patrick Rooney turned his head and he looked up into the tree. And the men looked up into the tree as well. And Patrick Rooney says, "Annie'll turn me, stop me from burning. You better come down, Annie, or it'll be the worse for you." So I thought I'd better come down. And I said to them, "I know nothing about the business. I know nothing about it. Look, all you've got to do is turn him, stop him from burning." And off they went, leaving me with Patrick Rooney tied to the spit, turning him to stop him from burning. Well, do you know, it had been a really strange evening. And I got to thinking about the pothole and, you know, that sort of strange cottage that had been. "Ah, it's burning me, you are. Turn away. It'll be the worse for you, Annie." "Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to stop. I'll keep turning. I'll keep turning." And so, but you know, when I'd gone up in the morning, everything had been fine. And then when it got dark, and then I found this, he jumped out of the cupboard at me. Annie. And I turned. And there he was, Patrick Rooney, unslinging himself from the hook. And I didn't stop. No. I didn't stay. I just ran the hell out of there as fast as I could. Away, anything to get away from Patrick Rooney. And I ran and I found a cottage and I went up the stairs and in through the door and there was a fire. Oh. And I sat down on the settee and there was a crackling at the fire and I began to feel a lot easier in my mind. I must have fallen asleep because when I got up in the morning, when I woke up in the morning, there I was lying on a hillside on the grass with my horse grazing by my side. And I thought, whoa. And when I looked, not a pothole, not a cottage, not a cupboard, of course, and no Patrick Rooney. Oh, thank God. So I got on my horse and I went home. And they said to me, Annie, where the hell have you been? You've been gone a long time. What have you been doing? And so, of course, I told them. And they said, well, actually, they laughed. They said, pull the other leg, it's got bells on it. But you know, when something like strange like that happens to you, don't you start churning it about? Don't you have to talk about it a bit more? And you know what they said? Stop it, Annie. Give it a break. Stop it. I don't want to hear it anymore. No, stop that story. Look, if you want to tell it again, go and tell it to someone else. So tonight I have. And I want to thank you for listening. Well, we've come to the time when we're going to have an interval. It's 10 minutes. Please avail yourself of the facilities. Please avail yourself of the bar. And you know, you were given those postcards to fill in. Don't forget to fill them in, because when they're picked up and you fill them in, you have a chance of winning tickets for our next show. Thank you so much.
Storytelling performances. Tomorrow, Sunday, November 19th, 3 p.m., Sarah Stein will present Laughter and Tears Encore, Jewish Stories with storyteller Sarah Stein. This is at the East Side Jewish Commons, 2420 Northeast Sandy. Now here, Portland Storytellers Guild on December 9th, Saturday. We'll have John Wilder, Brian Rohr, and Trish Anderson. Around the Hearth Fire. Then, titled, Is That Right? We have stories and songs by Franz and Kathy Vanderhorst, Friday, December 15th, Portland Mennonite Church. Didn't I tell you, I'm psychic, you're gonna be at all of these. And then our very own Ken Iverson. He will have a Zoom show, Saturday, December 16th, The Mouse at the Manger, Stories for Christmas. And you know how he did the Rindercella, Cinderella? I'm going to try that with the mouse in at the manger. You ready? The mouse at the manger, the mouse at the manger. Did you see I switched the M's there? The talent is just oozing, isn't it? And then into 2024, we have our very own Eric Foxman. Teens. Imagine what they can do. This will also be a Zoom storytelling show. This will be Saturday, January 20th at 5 p.m. Portland Storytellers Guild. I always feel like I need my rah-rah cheer because I love the Guild, all the things that they do. Now we have our stories, the showy part of what the Guild does, but there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. We've got story swaps and potlucks. We've got our extra shows. We have workshops. And we end our season always with the Sarah Hauser Festival of Stories. This information is on the back of the postcards that you've got there. So please take them home, start marking your calendars, and we so appreciate you being here tonight. Well, I don't know about you, but after that little spiel, I need a drink. I will take a sip of water, and when I return, we will start the second half. Except we won't, because the hat reminded me, it spoke. We have to choose the lucky person who will get the free tickets to the December 9th show. So I'm going to flip, and choose this one, Abby Ross. Yes! Where's Abby? All right, Abby, wonderful. We will see you in December. We will be in touch and get your free tickets. Now I really need a drink after that. Be right back. Now is the winter of our discontent, made glorious summer by this son of York. London, 1944. The actor Laurence Olivier stars on the London stage as Richard III. Richard III, Shakespeare's oiliest, most diabolical, most evil villain. Richard III of the hunchback and the limp and the greasy black hair. And Laurence Olivier as Richard is a sensation. Critics will later argue that it's the greatest stage performance of the 20th century. The London audiences of 1944, they are in awe. They are enraptured. Dare I say it? They are in love with this spider. It seems inexplicable. And yet, it is explicable. And I will now explic it. To understand Laurence Olivier's triumph as Richard, we have to look at the part he played just before Richard. So let's go back several months before Richard, to the north of England, to Manchester. The play is Arms and the Man by George Bernard Shaw. Laurence Olivier plays Sergius, the second male lead. Now, sometimes being the second male lead is like being the back end of the horse. But that isn't Laurence Olivier's problem. His problem is this part that he is playing, Sergius. He hates Sergius. He thinks he's a buffoon, a dolt, a chowderhead. Opening night. The next morning, the reviews. Oh, they laud the play. They laud the first male lead. Laurence Olivier, on the other hand, whew, the reviews are scathing. Naturally enough, this makes Laurence Olivier hate Sergius even more. It's now the evening after the second performance. Laurence Olivier broods in his dressing room. He is coiled into a hunch of hate, hating Sergius, hating the whole world. Then he hears a voice down the hall, a friend of his, a director by the name of Tony Guthrie. Now, Tony is not connected with this play. He's just come to see his friends perform. Well, he stops by Laurence Olivier's dressing room. Larry, some of us are going out for a bite. Come with us. Laurence Olivier sulks as he follows Tony Guthrie. In a snit, he stomps down the stairs. Well, now let us change our narrative and go into a scene as if it was in a movie. Establishing shot. Manchester, England, early 1944, late at night. A quiet street behind the theater. Two groups of people walk on the street. The group ahead, 5 people. The group behind, 2 men. One tall, lanky, with an easy lope. Tony Guthrie. The other man, shorter. And shorter still because he is a walking human fist. Tony speaks. Enjoyed your performance. Larry, what's the matter? Don't you like the part? Larry, stop growling. Stop walking. Well, Larry, don't you just love Sergius? Love Sergius, that dolt, that imbecile? Why, Tony, if you weren't so tall, I'd... Now, something is about to happen that will change Laurence Olivier's life. We're in our movie scene, and everything has slowed down. There's that one note in the violin and the movie soundtrack that signals to the audience, pay attention, something very important is about to happen. Close up, Tony Guthrie. Well, Larry, if you can't love him, you'll never be any good at him, will you? Close up, Laurence Olivier. His shoulders relax, and we see that hunch of hate drain away. His mouth opens as if he's forming a question. And those eyes that have been so dark and furious, they are at first confused, but then they clear. And we see behind his eyes his mind working as he hears the echo of Tony's challenge. If you can't love him, you'll never be any good at him, will you? Well, let's leave our movie scene and go to Laurence Olivier's memoir. He writes that night he tore open that play and he read it and he studied Sergius, scene by scene, line by line, word by word. And he began to appreciate his braggadocio, his grandiosity, his jubilation at his meager talents. And he felt a spark of admiration for Sergius. And that spark began to show in his performance. And he said by the end of the week, he loved Sergius more than he had ever loved anyone in his life. Well, several weeks later, the play opened in London. And all of the reviews began with a variation of Laurence Olivier towers above them all. Well, we know the next part he played was Richard. And that revelation on that Manchester street that seeped into him and turned that hunch of hate into love. And that spark of love continued on and inspired a hunchback of legend. Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York. Larry and I thank you for that. Well, now I would like to introduce our next teller, the one, the only, Mr. Eric Foxman.
You're lucky there's only one of me. Those of you who are storytellers and have studied storytelling, you know that all across the North American continent, the Native American people have told hundreds of legends about Coyote, the trickster. But the Pueblo people of the Southwest, they tell a very, very different tale. And inspired by their legend, I have incorporated all of the essential elements of their story to bring you this, my telling of that story. Little Blue Fox sat outside the door of the threshing room, where a dozen crows were greedily pecking at stray seeds. Suddenly, Coyote arrived. "There you are, Little Blue Fox. I've been looking all over for you. You are the cause of all of my problems. It is because of you that the two-legged ones at the Pueblo will not let me come near. And therefore, for days I've had nothing to eat, and I am now very hungry, so I am going to eat you up." No, Coyote, you don't want to do that today, because tonight under the full moon, there's going to be a wedding at the Pueblo. Yes, and I'm staying here over by the threshing room to make sure that the chickens who are inside don't run away. And in just a little while, the two-legged ones, they're going to come, they're going to get the chickens, they're going to make a big feast out of them for the wedding, and then they're going to take me and my guest, my very special guest, to the wedding. And you, as always, have arrived just in time, because you are my special guest. I am your guest? I mean, I am your guest. Yes, what a very special invitation. And Coyote, there's going to be lots of food there, more than you could eat off of my scrawny little body. Well, in that case, I accept the invitation. And I will even give a blessing to the wedding. Oh, all of us were hoping that you would do that. And so, Coyote laid down, and he was happy. Little Blue Fox was relieved, and he was troubled. He was relieved because he wasn't being eaten up by Coyote. But he was troubled because he had to figure some way to get out of this predicament that he had just created for himself. And after a little while, he said, Coyote, I'm not sure what's happened, but the two-legged ones should have come by now. Maybe they're having some kind of problem. I'll go down the path and see if they're having some sort of trouble. And I need you to stay here. Keep an eye on the door of the threshing room and make sure that none of the chickens wander away. And then Little Blue Fox trotted down the winding path, and as soon as he was out of sight, he ran. Coyote lay there looking at the door of the threshing room, thinking how hungry he was, thinking that there were chickens inside, thinking how good it would be to eat a chicken, thinking that if he ate just one chicken, the two-legged ones would never notice, and thinking that even if they did, he would blame it on Little Blue Fox, and who would they believe, Little Blue Fox or him? So he very silently crawled to the door and pounced inside. And in a flurry of flapping wings, crows all flew out of the window. Those aren't chickens. Little Blue Fox has made a mistake. Little Blue Fox was probably trying to fool me. I'm going to sniff out his trail, and when I catch up to him, well, I'm already starving now. I'm going to eat him up. And it was later that day, as the sun was sinking down towards the horizon, that he found Little Blue Fox lounging in a grove of trees. "Ah, there you are, Little Blue Fox. I believe you've made a mistake. I'm disappointed in you that you don't know the difference between a crow and a chicken. But you've wasted enough of my time that now I am starving and I am going to eat you up." Oh, Coyote, I'm so sorry. You're right, I did make a mistake. But the mistake is that the wedding is not tonight under the full moon. It's going to be under the next full moon at the end of the next moon cycle. But listen, don't you hear the drums there at the Pueblo? That means that there's going to be a big dance tonight. And we want you to come to the dance, because we've all heard you are the best dancer within a 2-day journey, and we're hoping that you'll teach us something wonderful and fun to dance. Would you please do that? Well, it's true that I have danced through all the seasons of my life, and I have taught many to dance, and there's going to be lots and lots and lots of food, even more food than even you could possibly eat. Well, in that case, I would be delighted to come to the dance, and I will be able to make it a great success just by being there and teaching you something new. I would be happy to come. And Coyote sat down and began to groom his fur and make himself look handsome. And Little Blue Fox sat there for a little while and then said, "Gee, I wonder if I've made another mistake. I thought I was supposed to be waiting here for them to come and get me and all of my friends who'd be waiting here, but they're not here. Now, I'll go to the top of the rise and see where they are. And while I'm gone, you talk to the squirrels that are up in the tree and the birds that are in the bushes, and you invite them to come to the dance. The more that there are at the dance, the better it will be. Don't you agree?" Well, Coyote thought about this, but more he was thinking, would Little Blue Fox try to trick him twice in one day? And while you're doing that, make sure you tell them, the squirrels and the birds, that you will teach them a brand new dance, and it'll be absolutely wonderful. Everybody will be looking forward to it. No, it wouldn't be possible. Little Blue Fox wouldn't be that foolish. And so he turned towards the squirrels and the birds, and Little Blue Fox went scampering up the top of the rise, and when he was over the top, he ran and ran and ran and ran and ran and ran. And Coyote was unable to convince the squirrels to come down from the tree and join him on the ground. He was hoping to teach them something to dance with, but they seemed to be reluctant, as if perhaps they didn't quite trust him. Maybe they had heard him say something about starving. And the birds, they were certainly not at all interested in dancing. They just simply flew off. So Coyote, in somewhat of despair, trudged up to the top of the rise. And when he got there, he saw no one. Little Blue Fox has indeed tricked me again. Now I'm famished. I'm going to follow his trail, and this time when I get him, I am going to eat him up. And he followed him. And Little Blue Fox, meanwhile, was running, and he kept looking over his shoulder, but eventually he saw Coyote was indeed chasing him and getting closer and closer. And just as the sun was dipping down below the edge of the horizon, there, Little Blue Fox was at the top of a rise, Coyote was at the bottom of it, and in front of Little Blue Fox, there was this huge, rocky outcropping that was too tall and steep to climb. But Little Blue Fox ran up to it, put his front paws against it, and leaned on it, just as Coyote arrived. Little Blue Fox, you've tricked me now twice, and I am famished. I am going to eat you up. Oh, no, don't do that, don't do that. This rock wall was about to fall down, and I'm holding it up. If you eat me up, all the stones, they'll fall, and they'll crush you and bury you. Coyote's eyes opened wide as he looked up at the rocks. And I'm getting so tired. Oh, please, you're so strong. Would you please help me hold this up? It's for your own sake. And Coyote ran up to the wall and leaned against it with all his might. And Little Blue Fox said, "Oh, thank you so much. You're doing such a good job all by yourself holding it. I'm so thirsty. I'm going to go to the pond at the end of the rock wall and get something to drink." And in the last rays of the setting sun, Coyote watched Little Blue Fox zip away. He held the wall up and held it and held it and held it until he realized that he was so exhausted that he was probably going to die one way or another. So he very slowly took his paws off of the wall, and nothing happened. I can't believe it. Little Blue Fox, he's tricked me again. Now I'm ravenous. I'm going to go to the pond, and I'm going to eat him up. And off he ran to the pond, getting there just in time to see Little Blue Fox start jumping up and down. Oh no, Coyote, I bought a big round of white cheese from a shepherd there, and I was bringing it to share with you, and I dropped it into the pond, and now I've been waiting for someone who swims as well as you do to go out and get it and save it for us. Cheese? Cheese? Did you say cheese? And Coyote's lips were already dripping with anticipation. Yes, yes, absolutely delicious, delicious cheese. Yes, look out there. You see the new moon that's come up, brand new full moon. It's just risen. It's huge. Look straight below it and you'll see the white round of cheese is down there in the water. Don't you see it? Oh, if only someone could swim out there and get it for us. Well, I'm a very good swimmer, and I could swim out that far, but my life body only will float at the top where I've mastered the coyote stroke. And my body's not heavy enough to go all the way down. Oh, that's too bad. We're not going to be able to get it. It smelled so absolutely wonderful, Coyote. Probably the best cheese that you've ever tasted. Oh, it's too bad that you're not heavy. Wait. I have an idea. You go and get a bunch of big rocks. I'll go and get some vines. We'll meet right back here. But we have to hurry because you look, the moon, it's rising. It's going higher and higher and higher. And as it goes higher, it's getting smaller and smaller. And if you look right down below, you can see the moon is getting smaller and smaller. It must be sinking further and further down. We have to go really, really fast. And the two of them ran off quickly. They came back. Little Blue Fox tied the rocks all around Coyote's shoulders. Coyote finally said, I think that's enough. I think it's fine. No. We need a couple more, the two biggest ones. Let me tie them around your neck. That'll get you all the way down to the cheese. Now there, that's perfect. It's absolutely ready. Okay, let's go to the edge here, to the overhang. You ready? I'm going to count to 3, and you take the biggest jump that you can, and I'll help you get that cheese by giving you a great big push. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. The Pueblo people say that Little Blue Fox never again had to worry about Coyote trying to eat him up. And now to bring us to a close, my very good friend and a mentor of mine over years, Barb Fankhauser.
Some of you may be familiar with him. He'll be here later if anybody would like to make his acquaintance. Once upon a time, there was a king and a queen, and they had 3 beautiful daughters. Oh, the oldest, her hair was the color of a raven's wing. The middle daughter's hair was the color of glowing embers in a winter fire. But the youngest daughter, she had hair like molten gold and eyes the color of a summer sky. Well, now the king and the queen, they were very astute parents, and they knew that with great beauty comes great trouble. And so they tried to mitigate the trouble as best they could. They sent their daughters to the most rigorous universities in the kingdom. The girls had to study economics and physics and meteorology and all kinds of very rigorous classes. And in addition, they also went to a special school for future leaders, learning diplomacy and tact and détente and entente and all kinds of, things that leaders need to know. And then to make sure that they were well-rounded individuals, the mother and father, the king and the queen, insisted that each girl pick out a youth sport to engage in. Well, the oldest picked equestrian, horsemanship, and the middle daughter picked archery. The youngest daughter picked fast-pitch softball. Now, that first season, she tried outfield and first base and shortstop, but when she got on the pitcher's mound, that was her spot. She was really good, and she loved it. I mean, she loved standing up on that mound and taking that ball and boom, right across the plate. And she pitched faster than anybody else on the team. And when you're really good at something, how you want to always kind of keep your hand in at it. And so wherever the princess went, she had that softball with her. She would take it with her, always working on that hand-eye coordination, keeping her arm loose and ready for the next game. And so there she was, one really hot summer day. She thought, there's only one place in all of the grounds of the castle, of the palace, where there's a cool breeze, and that's at the very far end of the grounds, there's a little grove there with a pond, and there's always a cool breeze blowing off the water. And so she decided she'd take her softball and go down there by the pond and just keep practicing. So off she went through the polo grounds, the tennis courts, the rose gardens, the vegetable gardens, to the very far end of the royal grounds, and into this grove, and plopped down on this mossy bank and was playing with her ball and thinking about things. And well, it was kind of warm, like I said, and her mind drifted, and she didn't pay attention, and the ball went up and bounced off the tips of her fingers, rolled across that mossy bank, and plopped into the water. Well, she dove for it, and she almost got it, but then it disappeared into the murkiness and was gone. And she had no idea if it was like a foot deep or 20 feet deep, or how she would ever get her ball back. And that was her favorite ball. And so she did whatever she did when she was thwarted. She threw herself down on the grassy bank and began to beat her little fists and kick her little feet and have a little tantrum and sob because she loved that ball and she didn't know how she was going to get back. And as she was doing that, she heard a voice behind her. "A ribbit. A ribbit. Why are you crying?" Well, she sat up and looked over, and there was a big frog on a lily pad out in the middle of the pond with beautiful, luminous eyes looking at her. And she said, "Oh, it's you, old croaker. Well, you must know I lost my ball in the pond, and I don't know how I'll ever get it back. I don't know how deep the pond is." "A ribbit. I could get it for you. I could get it for you." His little tongue shot out, and he grabbed a fly and brought it back in. Kind of like grossed out by that, but "You could get it for me, couldn't you?" she said. "Oh, that would be so lovely of you. Yes, of course you could get it for me." "A ribbit. What'll you give me? What'll you give me?" Oh, the princess thought, of course, that old quid pro quo. Well, okay, but she had been to diplomacy school, and she, had her tact and her. Oh, she said, "Well, this tiara is platinum with 5 carats of Burmese sapphires in it. I would give you that." But no use for jewels in the pond." "Oh, no, I don't suppose you have too many occasions for it, do you?" "Well, this is a vintage Versace dress. You won't find another one like it in 10 kingdoms." And but wouldn't fit. Wouldn't fit. No, of course it wouldn't fit. Good point. She was beginning to think the frog was being a little picky. But, she did want the ball, so she said, "Well, what would you like?" Well, that is what the frog had been waiting for. He jumped to the next nearest lily pad, and he said, "I want to eat off your golden plate, drink from your silver goblet, and sleep next to you on your silken pillowcase." Not what the princess had been expecting. But again, she kept that demeanor of course, this is a normal request. Meanwhile, in her brain, she was thinking, all right, if from here to the palace is, it's a good quarter mile, and I know that amphibians have to stay moist, and the temperature out, and she was doing the calculations of how hot the day was, how far the thing, what chances this frog could make it from this pond all the way up to the palace without getting desiccated. She decided the odds were in her favor. So she said, "Oh, all right." Well, the frog, into the water he came, up with the ball, out onto that mossy bank, which she scooped up in her hand, turned, and ran out of there in her little Pradas as fast as her little feet could go, ignoring completely the frog behind her going, "Wait for me, wait for me." Fat chance. When she got back, within an hour, she was in one of the shady courtyards in the palace with her ball, playing with it. Just the frog, a distant memory. Well, the next night at dinner, she came into the dining room. Her parents were there, her sisters were there, and whatever court hangers-on were still around for dinner. And she sat down, and as they were just about to start to eat, they heard this splat, 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 coming closer to the dining room door outside. And then there was this, and the princess said, "Oh, I'll see who it is." And she went to the door and opened it, and there was the frog, Well, she slammed the door and came back and sat down, and she looked a little flustered, and her father said, well, who was it? Oh, no, nobody important, nobody important. It doesn't matter. And then they heard a voice outside the door. Youngest king's daughter, open for me. Give to me what you promised by the pond. Give to me now what you promised. Youngest king's daughter, open for me. Well, the king looked at her daughter and said, that sounds like it's someone looking for you, and as though you have some arrangement with them? She said, oh, it's just silly, Dad. Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't, I mean, I lost my ball at the pond, and this frog offered to get it for me, and that was it. Uh-huh. And what did you offer in return? Well, I didn't offer anything. I didn't really offer anything in return. He asked for, and I sort of agreed that he wants to eat off my golden plate, drink from my silver goblet, and sleep next to me on my silken pillowcase. Can you imagine? Well, what did you promised this? Well, yes, I know, but it doesn't matter. I mean, because he's not like a human dad. He's like an amphibian. My daughter, you are a princess. Your word is your bond. If you promised him these things, then you will give these things to him. Oh, she was mortified. But her father was the king and was not about to truck with her silliness. So she went to the door and opened it, and that frog hopped in as though he belonged there. He got to her chair and he said, pick me up, pick me up. So she reached down, she picked him up and put him on the table, and he hopped right over to her golden plate. Well, she sat down and picked up her fork and thought, trying to maintain as much dignity as she could, she was just going to kind of ignore what was going on. And she picked up her fork, and she saw that little fly-catching tongue shoot out and grab a pea off her plate. And then it came back again and took the chicken right off the tines of her fork while she was done eating. She just sat back and she watched that frog just, help himself to, whatever on her plate. And then it hopped over to her silver goblet. Now, she knew that her father would probably draw the line at this because he had poured that night his very favorite Oregon Pinot Noir. Well, the frog was waiting for the cup, and she picks him up, and he just laps up that fine wine, and then he turns to the king. That frog turns to the king and complimented him, knew the vintner and the year that wine had been made. The king was like, finally someone to talk, on wine with him. And he and the frog chatted about the superiority of Oregon Pinots versus California Pinots. They had a lovely conversation, and then finally the frog came back over and said, I'm tired. Take me to your chambers, princess. Well, her sisters were sniggering over it because their little sister was the haughtiest princess around. And for them to see her having to sleep with a frog was just too delicious. All right, she picked up the frog and she carried it to her chambers. And when she got there, she put it down on the foot of her bed, and that frog just hopped right up there onto her pillow. Well, she was not having that. She went up there and she moved the frog off and she said, listen, this is my pillow. This half, you can have that half of the pillow. This is my half. You do not cross that middle line. You understand that? Well, the frog jumped onto his half of the pillow and seemed almost to be grinning at her. She walked around the bed, got onto her side, laid down and closed her eyes, and she was lying there, and she felt the bedclothes kind of rustling around behind her, and then all of a sudden this hand, a paw, whatever a frog has on the end of his appendage, landed on her cheek, and she lost it. She jumped up. She reached down. She scooped up that frog, and she wound up, and she fast-pitched it across the room. And when its body hit the stone wall across her bed, she came back to her senses, and she watched in horror as its body slid slowly down the wall, leaving this little green skid mark there behind it. Well, she jumped out of bed. She went over. She picked it. Oh, its little belly was up. It was just white. It was so pale and still. And she looked at it. Well, of course, she'd also taken all the Red Cross life-saving classes. Her parents wanted her to do that. So she listened for a heartbeat. She wasn't sure she heard one, so she knew what to do, though. She Staying alive, staying alive, staying alive. And there was a heartbeat, But he was so still. And, next step. She pried his little mouth open to make sure there was no obstruction of the air passage. And then she put her lips on his mouth, and there was an explosion. And suddenly, where she'd been cradling a frog in her hands just moments before, her fingers are now entwined in the thick, dark curls of a full-grown, really quite handsome young man, stretched out on the floor in her bedchamber. He was as still and as pale as the frog, she could tell, because, well, he was wearing exactly what the frog had been wearing, which was, well, nothing. Well, she kept her eyes focused on his face, and he was a very nice face, too. And then his eyelids fluttered, and they opened, and his two luminous eyes looked back at her, and then he spoke. Ribbit. Ribbit. You only broke half the spell. You only broke half the spell. Oh, she said, well, what do I have to do? And he said, I need a real kiss. I need a real kiss. Oh, well, I can do that. And she put her lips against his, and she kissed him and kissed him. Oh, a kiss of the ages. And when she was done, the spell was totally broken, and he was a fully intact young man once again. Well, he sat up and he explained that actually he was a prince from a neighboring kingdom, and a witch in the neighborhood had felt that he was a little too haughty for her taste and had put this spell on him that could only be broken by a kiss from the haughtiest princess in 9 kingdoms. Oh, she said, well, that would be me, yes. So, well, here you are, and my father has insisted that you sleep on my silken pillow, so shall we? And so they did. And in the morning, when they emerged from her chambers, of course they were engaged, and well, there was a fabulous wedding that went on and on and on, and when it was over, they got in his carriage and they went off to his kingdom, where they lived as happily as 2 very haughty young royals could possibly be for the rest of their lives. And there is the unexpurgated version of the Frog Prince, and here he is. I had promised anybody that saw my video, if they wanted a kiss, he's here for you. So I want to invite the rest of my fellow tellers to come back up on the stage with me for a final bow, and thank you. Oh, okay.
One together and the one together.
Hooray! Thank you. Right.
Thank you all for coming, and I want to let you know everything we were talking about with the announcements is on our website, www.portlandstorytellers.org. So you can find all the information there. Thank you for coming.
And all of you are warmly, warmly invited to come up to the platform here. The frog awaits.
Yes.